Okay, so we're going to break the chuck away from the rest of the animal. We're going to cut 5 ribs, cutting between the 5th and 6th ribs. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to hug this 5th rib to ensure that we get the largest ribeye possible. So we're going to make a mark here along our 5th rib. Bring our well saw in. Make this cut through the bone. We'll come back with a breaking knife to finish cutting the muscle away. Okay, now we're going to take and we're going to go from our brisket muscle here, and we're going to go right in the center of that fat cap here. I'm going to go straight across and just kind of mark out where I'm going to use the saw. Should be cutting across the shank and separating the brisket from the rest of the chuck. Again, we'll bring our well saw down. I'm going to cut through these rib bones, and then we've got the shank bone here underneath. So I'll need to cut through both. Okay, so now we have the chuck here. We've got this ridge here, our shoulder blade running here, and we're going to use that. I'm going to run my knife up here on top of it, and I should be hitting a ridge muscle, or I'm sorry, a ridge bone, and we're going to pull that outside chuck off. So that'll roll off here. I'm going to turn this around. Again, knife is on top here on this ridge. And I'll hit a bone right there. I'm going to turn it up to a 90-degree angle. I'm just going to follow that ridge out. Should end up on the other side. This is our outside chuck. Should end on top of this knuckle bone here. Just trace that around like so. I'm going to turn it up on its side. Now let gravity do a lot of the pulling for me. So again, I'm right back on top of that shoulder blade. So I've separated alongside this shoulder blade. It's going to start to dip down. The shoulder blade only runs right here. It's going to dip down into this fat seam. Okay, like so. And then that muscle will separate on that seam.
So this is the clawed portion of the chuck, or the shoulder clawed. The first thing that we'll do in breaking the clawed is we'll remove this muscle right here. This is actually 2 muscles with the same name. It's the teres major and the teres minor. And they make up what you call the petite tender. And so we'll go ahead and remove that following this muscle seam right here. And then this all up here is just going to be some fat that'll come off with it. And then that can be trimmed up and cleaned up and ready for retail. So the next muscle that we'll remove is this muscle right here. This is the infraspinatus. This muscle is actually the second most tender muscle in the body. And this is where top blade steaks or flat iron steaks come from. So once again, we're just going to be following a muscle seam. And this seam gets really tight right here. And the rest of this is fat that will be trimmed off later so it can be cut straight through. The next muscle that will be removed here is actually called the latissimus dorsi. And it's this big triangular piece right here. Once again, we're just going to follow the fat seams of these muscles to help take them off. This cut is often one that's used for trim. It is a pretty lean muscle piece, and so a lot of people like to marinate them and use them for marinated beef cuts. And then lastly, what you have here is the triceps complex. So the clawed heart or the clawed roast is actually located right here. So how we separate that out is, once again, we're just following those muscle seams. All the way down until we reach fat. And then we can start here too. Sometimes it helps to start from all angles and then meet in the middle. And the remaining muscles that are left as part of this complex all can go into trim. And then from here, so this portion's the clawed heart. This will be cleaned up and all this fat will be removed. And then this back portion will be trimmed down to your specification or your liking.
Okay, so now we're going to cut our flat iron. So we pulled that away from our outside chuck. We want to clean up that muscle. So we're going to take off this silver skin and the fat. Again, we'll flip it over, see if we got anything to trim here. This side's looking pretty good for now. You're going to want to take some of that cap muscle off. It's going to kind of fillet like a fish. So you can see this seam running right down the center of it. You want to be right on top of that. Just kind of peeling it back. I'm pulling as much as I'm cutting. I'm going to kind of clean that cut up a little bit. Sure that we're getting the excess connective tissue. This would not be very good left in. We just want that muscle. Just kind of square it up a little bit. I like making it look nice. Okay. So there's one pair for us. Come back, and now we're going to do the other side of that tendon. So now I'm going to be pulling the rest of that tendon off. Now it's pretty thick, and it doesn't cook out, so you can't really leave that in there and expect it to be a good eating experience for people. So it's pretty thick stuff. So we're just going to throw that off to the side. Again, we're just going to square this up, making sure that we got all those seams off there. I'm going to come back, take that one off now. When cut right, this is the second most tender piece of beef. If you don't get this stuff off there, it will not be. Okay, cut that in half, and that's our second pair. Okay, so our next step is to take this knuckle off. So our bone is here. It's sitting on the cap here with the shoulder blade. So just going to trace around this. Should be able to get this to pop off. There's a tendon that holds that in, so you got to make sure you get that cut. And that rolls off here. Typically that goes into trim. Okay, next we're going to take the shoulder blade off here. So before we've gone on top of it, now we're going to go underneath it. So again, just trace the bottom. Always keep your knife on the bone. Okay, so going underneath it here, you should be able to get yourself kind of a hand hold. So it's as much pulling as it is cutting. Get a little more here. And we're going to follow this. This is our chuck tender here, our mock tender. We're going to follow that seam out. So kind of pull it back a bit. Again, try to stay up on the bone as close as you can. You can see this fat seam is starting to separate away. See if you can roll this out a little bit. And I just want that chuck muscle so the rest of this fat can go away. And we'll separate that off. So there's our chuck tender or mock tender here. Okay, so now we have the chuck tender. We're going to remove that from the scapula. So I'm going to take my knife, follow on the opposite side of this ridge. I'm just peeling alongside the bone. Okay, like such. And this is your mock tender or chuck tender. Okay, so we took the outside chuck off, the scapula's off, so now we're going to do the inside chuck. Sitting here. So I'm going to try taking this tail. I'm just going to come across and make a mark here. And this is going to separate the short ribs from the inside chuck. Now we got bone going underneath, so I can't complete this cut all the way through, but you should be running on bone all the way through. We're going to rotate it, and we're going to square it up from where these ribs end. We're going to come across, make a cut with our knife here. Again, you're not going to be able to finish the cut because you got bone running all the way through the bottom of it too. But this will just give us a nice square cut here where we can roll this chuck roll off. So another name for it is a chuck roll. That's how it gets that name, is it's going to roll off the bone. Okay, so we got this square cut. I'm going to come back through. I'm going to turn my knife to follow that bone off on the bottom. And you can see it running here. So your knife's going to be kind of at an angle going down, but you want to make sure that you stay on that bone. Okay, so now I'm at this ridge. I'm going to go along this ridge and separate that from the muscle. And then the last part is rolling it off this set of ridges here, the feather bones. Disconnect some of this on the back side. That's kind of what's holding us up here from rolling. Like you said, you should be starting able to roll this out. All right, there's our inside chuck. Okay, now that we have our inside chuck, we can start working on getting some of these value stakes out of here. So we're going to start on this end, the side that looks like a ribeye here. This is your Delmonico stakes, or where we're going to pull our Delmonico stakes from. I'm going to follow this seam and pull this muscle up. I want to save as much of this tail as I can. The muscle is going to want to separate here, But if you make a quick cut here and kind of give it a different way to go, you'll be able to keep some of that. So there's this giant tendon here that we can use kind of as a marker to get started. And you can use your knife here too. I kind of like getting an outline of it first. And this muscle will peel up. So we'll just cut alongside this tendon, separate that first. Once we get the tendon out of the way, we've got the rest of the chuck muscle here. So now you can just follow this fat seam out. You don't want to cut too far into the meat. You want to be in that fat seam. And we're just rolling it off the top here. So this first few steaks here are the Delmonico. You can usually get 2 or 3 1-inch steaks off here. And so this is just a continuation of the ribeye muscle. There's 2. See what this next one looks like. Okay, so there we have 3. This next piece is going to stay as our inside chuck. So this would be our chuck roast muscle here. All right, so now we've got the Delmonico and the inside chuck muscle off. We've still got this tendon here, so we can cut that off. Okay, next thing we're going to try to do is get our Denver steaks off here. So I'm just going to do some cleanup here. Get some of that dry age off. Try to work on getting some of this fat off so we can see our seams a little bit better. Okay, we can get our Sierra cut here. Gonna peel that off. And use that as a substitute for flank steaks. Okay, flip it over again. I'm gonna clean up some of these seams so we can see what we got here. Okay, so I'm gonna take some of these cap muscles off. We don't want those. Okay, what we're looking for is getting our fingers, and I'll show those when I get them out, but you can start to see them start to appear here. And this muscle is going to fan out. Okay, so here's the seam I've been looking for. This fat runs right down the center of it, looks like. I'm going to kind of peel that off. Okay, so here you can see our fingers on our Denver start to show up. So you can see the fat seams running this way. Again, I'm going to take some of this off so we can see this a little better. Okay, so you can kind of see it fans out. The meat's going in different directions. So when you're cutting a steak, you always want to go with the seam to break it here. So when you cut your final steak, the end goal is to get the seams running with your bite. So you can see the seams here. When we cut our steaks, we want to be going across them. So when the consumer bites into it, it's going with the grain. Okay, so I'm just going to square that up. Again, we're doing about 1-inch steaks. Oh, looks like I got a little crazy with the knife there. Okay, so there's one. Okay, we got 3 off that piece. Should have been 4 probably. And we'll just square up this last piece. When you're cutting steaks, always make sure that they have a nice presentation to them. That'll be our Denver steaks here.
So now that we've removed all of the connective tissue, bones, and fat from the cuts, now that we are left with our retail cuts from the chuck portion of the carcass. So the first one that we have here would be the chuck roll, which can be made into a chuck roast. We have a little bit of latissimus dorsi left, which would be more of a special trim. Here we have chuck eye steaks, followed by the mock tender. It looks like a tenderloin, but it's actually extremely tough, which is why we call it the mock tender. The petite tender as well, those are great for grilling. Then you've got Denver steaks, chuck short ribs, flat iron steaks, clawed roast, and then we have the remaining of the neck bones with some meat attached for soup bones. And then a pile of trim that can be used for ground beef and stew meat.